necessarily reflect those of Radio Islam International or its management.
You are tuned into Sabah al-Muslims on Radio Islam International.
16 minutes past 8. You are listening to Sabah al-Muslim Drive Time on Radio Islam International. News has been swirling for some time around the state of affairs at Mabroor Investments. Investors have been complaining on social media that they have submitted withdrawal requests months ago, over a year ago, and to date they haven't yet been paid, and that recently the percentage of profits have declined significantly, and in the case of some investors, declared profits have not yet been paid out. Wian Smith, the CEO, recently did an online interview where he gave some clarity regarding the factors that have led to the current situation of distress at Mabroor Agri, the current challenges and the possible options going forward, including that of the gradual sale of assets and then paying out the investors their capital amounts. Subsequently, some investors went to court asking for Mabroor to be placed under business rescue. And yesterday we learned that this application was granted by the court. This, for investors, has given rise now to a new basket of questions and concerns. And we thought it would be appropriate to reach out to someone who can give us some clarity and give us some perspective. And in this regard, we thank and we welcome to the program Yaseen Badat, who is a non-executive director at Mabroor Agri Pty Limited. Yaseen has been gracious in agreeing to come on and chat with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Yaseen, and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to Maulana and the listeners of Radio Islam, alhamdulillah.
So let me start off by asking you about your own role and involvement. And I want to try and simplify it as far as possible for our listeners. When you say a non-exec director, what does it mean? What's your role? What's your function?
So, Maulana, if you look at the structure or the new structure in the Mabroor in common deed partnership managed by Mabroor Agri Pty Limited, the transition happened late 2022, early 2023 to be precise. And with that transition came the admission of a board of directors made up of effectively two components. The one component would be the executive component, who are and have always been responsible for the day-to-day operations of the fund, i.e. everything that happens to keep the fund operational on a daily basis. And then the addition to that directorate was a series of 4 individuals to make up the non-executive component, to play a role in terms of oversight, in terms of strategy, in terms of troubleshooting within the business, and to help the business navigate from an advisory point of view certain challenges or non-challenges that the business may be experiencing at some point in time. Our involvement in the business in a formal capacity has only been now for the past 2 years, like I said. However, our informal involvement behind the scenes goes back to when our Hazrat Mufti Ibrahim Desai, Allah give him Jannatul Firdaus, was alive. And he was very passionate about making sure that Mabroor remains a viable investment entity for the Muslim community. And as a result, he asked us to be involved or to stay involved to ensure that at every step of the way, inshallah, the interests and the investment of the investor community are protected. So that's the reason why, inshallah, we chose to remain involved. And inshallah, we will continue to remain involved, inshallah, and assist the business to navigate through what is definitely a challenging time, inshallah.
A quick one on that, Yaseen. Your position, is it a paid one or non-paid one? I ask because obviously this is a topic of conversation amongst the investors.
No, that's a very good point, Maulana. Maulana, currently we work 16 hours a day. We have been doing that now for the past couple of months. And I can say unequivocally and absolutely certainly that we get absolutely no remuneration for our work whatsoever. There's no formal salary as board members, and that is part of our board constitution that we put together when the business was effectively transitioning into a more regulated structure. None of the board members earn salaries from the fund. The only thing that we are able to invoice the business for, and that is from time to time, is when we do attend board meetings for our accommodation and our air tickets to get to obviously the head office in Stellenbosch, and a small stipend that we are able to claim for the particular day. But even that, in most cases, board members don't actually invoice for, because ultimately it's not about the money. It's about making sure that, inshallah, the right thing happens always for our investors, inshallah.
Now, I just want to once again simplify it for our listeners, right? You speak about Agri SA Pty Limited. For the common investor, they just know Al Mabroor.
Correct.
And many of them invested in livestock, be it cattle or
Correct.
buffalo or whatever. Now we
Correct.
understand subsequently that Al Mabroor diversified, there's accommodation, there's diesel and whatever else. Just in layman's terms, give us the structure and explain to us, is it only the livestock or the farming component that is dealing with challenges, or is it across the board?
No, so Maulana, Al Mabroor as an investment house, so to speak, is managed by Al Mabroor Projects, which is Vian and his investment team, his company, which has always been a very critical part of the operation. So like any investment firm, investment company, you'd have a variety of different projects or investment opportunities under the umbrella of the organization. Al Mabroor is no different. So the Agri Fund is effectively one of the pillars within the Al Mabroor stable of investments. There's the hospital fund, there's the student housing fund, there's the vehicle finance project, for example, which all make up structured pillars that function and operate independently, but administered and managed by Al Mabroor Projects. That's effectively how the business is structured. The problems that we are seeing at the moment are isolated to the Agri Fund. I must confess, even though the hospital fund and the student housing fund being real world opportunities are not immune to certain challenges as well. Every real world business, every real world investment opportunity will have operational challenges that come up from time to time. The hospital fund, for example, even though that's not a part of the conversation today, deals very heavily with the road accident fund. And for example, there are some challenges in terms of recouping some funds that are currently owed, and the team is working very hard to get that under control. The student housing fund, the two buildings that Al Mabroor have are Highlands Loft and Saratoga out in Gauteng. The bulk of those beds are occupied by NSFAS. And we know NSFAS as well, occasionally does have a couple of wobbles here and there from an admin point of view. And unfortunately, those administrative issues when dealing with these kinds of organizations do have a tendency of trickling down to the investor community. But for the most part, everything is segregated, everything is operated independently and managed independently of the Al Mabroor Agri Fund, which is currently going through a trying time.
All right. So if I understand what you're saying correctly, the bulk of the challenges are around the Agri Fund, although there are challenges in the other projects. And that's why some of those investors have also been complaining. Now, what I want to avoid is repeating too much of what Wian has already clarified in his previous interview and trying to get more clarity on so to speak, further issues. So in summary, right, Wian seemed to be saying that what hit Al Mabroor Agri, right, this is now the livestock component, is what we would call a perfect storm. There were challenges within the agriculture sector. Then there was some concern around investors, which resulted in a kind of avalanche, if you like, of investors overnight wanting to withdraw their money. And that was not matched by a corresponding number of investors wanting to simultaneously invest. That created cash flow and liquidity problems. And all of these things happening simultaneously resulted in Al Mabroor Agri being in the difficulty that it is. Is that the story in a nutshell, or is there a little bit more to that?
No, Maulana, that is effectively the story. And when we talk about Al Mabroor, Maulana, I speak for myself and a variety of other members of the community who may have been advisors or brokers for the business. Remember, we are also invested in Al Mabroor. We have our life savings there, our parents' funds are there, our children's education funds have been there for a number of years. So we talk about Al Mabroor very passionately, but with the intention of wanting the business to effectively, inshallah, get fixed. And I think that's very, very important. Vian is absolutely on point. I mean, he, of all of us, is effectively the man that has engineered this business over the past 14 years. He's created the business. He's created the opportunities. He's worked very, very closely with many, many members of our Muslim community on a variety of different projects and opportunities and potential projects that could or could not happen. So he's absolutely right. It is essentially a perfect storm. It is essentially there was a run on the fund early last year as a result of whatever may have transpired. The fund basically said, okay, the only logical way for us to effectively satisfy the investors that are wanting to withdraw would be to dispose of assets. That process was managed throughout what was a difficult agricultural environment last year, unsuccessfully. And I think to be very fair to the investor community, the communication from Al Mabroor perhaps maybe could have been handled a bit differently. I know that there were many promises made, there were many commitments given, especially during the course of last year, that investors latched onto. But the nature of business and the nature of business deals, or the kinds of agricultural deals that happen behind the scenes, especially in the agri fund, are deals that are subject to a variety of external macro factors and micro factors that might effectively allow the deal to either continue or not. And I think in Al Mabroor's case, nothing they did last year worked. Nothing they did last year worked. Their communication didn't work. Their strategy to dispose of assets definitely didn't work. Their management around investor communications, concerns, anxiety definitely didn't work. And I know the one thing that we've been driving as a non-executive component of the board for months now is that, in times of uncertainty, don't communicate, over-communicate. Over-communicate to the point where people must become fed up hearing from you, but at least we know that they're hearing from you and the message that they're hearing is effectually factual. So yes, Vian is on point, Molana, without laboring and going into a series of events that transpired. His account was absolutely on point. And the question is now, where do we go to from here, inshallah?
So, do forgive me for rushing you a bit, Yaseen, but I want to cover quite a bit of ground, right? So you mentioned that the primary function of the non-exec component like yourself was oversight. Now, to what extent did you provide oversight? Was the oversight restricted to whatever information Vian and the management team gave you, or were you able to look at things independently? And if so, I have a two-part question. Did you uncover any fraud in terms of what led to Al Mabroor being where it is now? And if the answer is no, if there was no fraud, were there mistakes? Was there mismanagement and missteps that you picked up in this oversight, independent oversight function over and above what the management team supplied you in terms of information?
Well, listen, so that's a very good question. So at every board meeting, at every engagement, we are provided board packs, as is normal and customary for every board meeting. The board packs are made up of information provided by management in terms of what's happening operationally and otherwise, and a whole host of information that we then request in preparation for the board meetings, which is also very standard procedure. At the moment, Maulana, I can confidently say nothing that we have seen points to any fraud, nothing we have seen points to any theft, nothing we have seen points to any malicious activity within the fund. That's very, very important. To answer the second part of your question, I think that's very critical, is that, Maulana, when you look back retrospectively at any decision that was made, be it business, personal, or otherwise, hindsight is always going to be an exact science. There's obviously something that everybody could have perhaps maybe done differently in the past that would have ultimately shaped the future. So in Vian's defense, and if he was on this call today, and he said this quite adamantly in the past, that the decisions made, if I could explain it to you in a very, very simple, in a nutshell, from 2014, which was the inception of the agricultural fund, up until about 2018, it was a very well-managed fund focused primarily on the feedlotting of beef and cattle, as we'd known the fund to be, the cattle feeding investment, From 2019 to 2022, that was effectively the purple patch that the business had received, where money started coming in very steadily. And strangely enough, it was during COVID, before COVID, just after COVID. So it was obviously at a time when people were looking at alternatives, looking at different kind of investment opportunities to supplement income, to subsidize what they currently have. And during that 4-year period, money came in quite steadily. At that particular point in time, the management team, with the investment mandate that they had, with the investment team that they had, felt that, listen, it wouldn't be prudent to have all our eggs in one basket. And that's the rationale. We need to look at diversifying across a variety of other agricultural opportunities, most of them to supplement the fund. For example, the fund plants its own maize, the fund has its own farms for backgrounding, the fund owns its own fuel depot, where at one particular point in time, or currently, the fuel consumption within the fund was obviously at a very high level. So the idea was to look at streamlined agricultural opportunities around beef, which remains the core, to effectively subsidize and diversify the investment nature of the fund. Now,
was the diversification a mistake in hindsight, in your opinion?
Well, listen, I think the diversification, the fundamental possible flaw that we could probably look at that scenario was that what the fund actually then did was it took money that was given to Al Mabroor with a short-term mandate, and it made long-term decisions, And I think that was pretty much possibly something that could have been reconsidered at the time. Molana, my apologies. We actually have a very doomy and gloomy day here in Pietermaritzburg as well. So I'm not sure whether that is possibly
could be
a problem as
all
well.
right, I'm gonna just rush you for short answers because I want to cover quite a bit of ground. Right.
Yeah.
So that question we were dealing with, right? You explained that no fraud, no mismanagement, nothing dubious. Is that based on information you've independently verified, or the information that the management team has provided to you?
Well, that was information that the management team has provided to us and information that we've requested. So anything that we've requested in conjunction with what they've provided for us has indicated that there's no fraud. Yes, questionable decisions in the past, possibly, But again, like I said, our mandate at the moment is not to really look too much into the past, but rather to look at the future, because I think that's what investors want. They want clarity, transparency, and they want to know where the business is heading to.
Was it necessary, Yaseen, to get the investor permission to diversify before the management and the board went ahead?
Molana, as an agricultural fund, I think that is a question that remains to be answered. The partnership agreement of the past makes mention of the fact that the general partner at that particular point in time, under the old common law partnership structure, right, had a mandate in agriculture. That could be perhaps maybe loosely interpreted to say, is it specific agriculture or is it broad agriculture? When the new ECP, the Encommended Partnership Structures, came in 2023, as much as I know there's a lot of investors that may not have necessarily been aware of that, I have to admit that it was mentioned very explicitly at the 22 AGM, at the 23 AGM as well. Unfortunately, the AGMs are not very well attended. I think if you think about the fund, 8,000 investors approximately, you may have 800, 600, 500 there and thereabout coming to the AGMs physically, which obviously has been a challenge over the years. And we understand full because, investors are spread across the country. To get to Gauteng on a particular day, on a Saturday generally, that's when they had it. They had a follow-up session in Durban in 2022 and 23 to obviously amplify the message. Right. And it was very explicitly mentioned that this transition to the ECP is happening. Now, under the ECP agreement that was shared with investors on email prior to the transition, the ECP makes very clear reference that the participation in agriculture does have a mandate to span across a variety of different agricultural instruments, not necessarily just cattle feeding.
Now, the business rescue thing, right? I want to avoid the technicalities and keep it simple. We understand any investor has that legal right to apply to a court and say, put this entity under business rescue. This is what happened.
Absolutely.
The court has granted this application. Now, from an investor's perspective, in layman's terms, right, what does this mean, business rescue? Does it mean that these individuals, now that the court have appointed, do they take over the management, or does the management now report to them? A. B, does this now push back the timelines? Is it going to be a long process? People are comparing it to, say, for example, Habib Bank, but that's a liquidation. Is there a difference? And what about the cost now, of paying these people who are going to be in charge of the business rescue? Would that impact on the investors in a significant way?
Molana, strictly speaking, and thank you very much for the question, strictly speaking, investors have the right to effectively drive a process like this. And as we have seen in the past week, alhamdulillah, investors have exercised that right. Business rescue from a fundamental point of view is effectively what it means. A specific set of professionals are effectively court mandated to come in and as a priority rescue the business. Take the business from effectively ICU to high care and eventually out of the hospital door. If you compare it to a very, very simple analogy. The process now dictates that the business rescue practitioners in Zahir and Sean are now effectively the responsible people in the company for management decisions, supervision and oversight. And each and every person of the management team and board will now take instructions from them. So as much as there will be a cohesive relationship, inshallah, to make sure that ultimately the goal is for the betterment of the fund, they are now in control of the management decisions within the company, and they will effectively take that supervisory capacity very, very strongly, I'm pretty sure. The other thing, Molana, that has to be considered is that when you look at the cost of a business rescue exercise, business rescue practitioners at the moment in South Africa, I mean, it's a lot of research that I've been also doing this past couple of days to understand the nature of how these things operate, anywhere from 1,700 to 2,000 Rand an hour, depending on obviously the scope of the work. we're quite confident that a guy like Zahir, alhamdulillah, is somebody that can be spoken to. And obviously, those are the kinds of conversations that will be happening behind the scenes, because we cannot afford for the fund to have any more financial burden placed on it at the expense of the investor community. That we have to be very, very, very clear on. The other thing that I think is very, very important, Maulana, to understand is the time frame is a time frame also, and again, based on the plan that they see fit to be put in place. So the management team, initially, if I could just deviate for a second, the board's for the better part of last year, the latter part of last year into this year, the board's intention was to effectively handle the process independently and internally, but with a specific set of professionals to effectively do what a rescue practitioner would do, but do it internally at a much reduced costs. And that's precisely why the application was opposed and defended by Al Mabroor. But we completely respect the decision of the court. Strictly speaking, again, Maulana, from a fundamental point of view, when you look at who absorbs the cost of business rescue, the cost of business rescue has to be absorbed by the company and by the assets or income that is generated within that company. So again, from a fundamental point of view, at the moment, we can assume that will have to now be borne by all investors within the fund, because ultimately the investors are the ultimate beneficial owners of the fund.
Is this going to prolong the process, Yaseen? Are we going to go into years instead of months because of business rescue?
Well, not necessarily. Again, I don't want to talk to anything specific to what Zahir and Sean might have in mind, but it's not going to be a short process. That much I can tell you. Vian had made an indication in his initial conversation of 12 to 18 months. But we at this particular stage, it would be very premature. I think what would be perhaps maybe more wiser at the moment for our investor base and our investor community is for us to give Sean and Zahir a little bit of space to effectively come up with their plan, have a thorough look of the business, because obviously that's going to be a critical part of their first appointment. They have very strict timelines to adhere to. So within a couple of weeks, they have to obviously present some kind of direction. I know that the board are meeting them next week for a 2-day session for us to effectively strategize and look at what their role. So yes, I can't give any kind of indication on timeframes, but I will tell you that we will make sure that inshallah it happens as quickly as possible.
Prior to the business rescue application, right? Wian had pretty much said in his interview that now there was going to be the process of selling of the assets gradually to get the best price and then pay out the investors their capital amounts. Is that still the decision, or can this business rescue thing change that entire decision and dynamic?
No, absolutely. And, in Vian's talk, he spoke about the possibility of investors wanting to remain in a brand new kind of opportunity that does only what it did in the past, buying and selling of cattle. The dynamics are very much, we haven't reached that crossroads yet. And again, had it been an independent process, I guess we could have effectively looked at it a little bit more holistically. But now we'd have to apply that narrative and those comments and those suggestions with Zahir and Sean, and then see, where do we sort of meet in the middle? What kind of a plan can we possibly put in place to effectively satisfy both elements of that investor community? I must stress, from my point of view, I've spoken to hundreds of clients over the past couple of weeks, and in my mind, and this is my personal opinion, not necessarily an Al Mabroor official opinion, I can see perhaps maybe a slightly larger majority wanting to remain invested and a smaller number of investors wanting to leave. So I think if we're able to get to a point where both sides of the conversation can be sort of satisfied, inshallah, I think there's a very good possibility that the fund could continue in some way, shape or form, inshallah.
Now, a quick one here, right, still on the business rescue, right? Someone seems to have picked up a wording in the ruling somewhere that it's subject to acceptance of creditors of Al Mabroor. So does that mean that the investors who are not happy about the court's decision can object to it, or can ask for other individuals to be placed in place of Zahir and Sean?
So remember, Maulana, first of all, we have to understand one thing. The investors are not creditors. The investors are shareholders and partners of the Al Mabroor and Common Deed Partnership, which houses the investment assets. That's very important. So investors are not creditors of the fund. So again, fundamentally, yes, there would have to be the plan would have to be put before the investor community for a level of adoption, understanding, and hopefully, inshallah, approval or whatever it may be in the next couple of weeks. But I just want to correct this particular person to say the investors are not creditors in the fund. The investors are actually shareholders and partners within the Al Mabroor and Commandite Partnership, which houses the investment assets.
But can the investors object to the business being put under business rescue or to the individuals concerned? Because I see some people saying the applicants asked for other individuals, but Al Mabroor seemed to be more comfortable with the individuals that the court appointed. So they're now asking a question, is this going to be some sort of pally-pally behind the scenes between the management and those put in charge of the business rescue? Can the investors object?
Yeah. Maulana, from a legal point of view, I can't comment on that, but I'm pretty sure that, in these matters, investors will have a voice, most definitely have a voice, all investors will have a voice. So I'm not precisely sure if an objection can officially be lodged, but I can tell you that channels of communication can definitely be open with the BRPs to assess and to obviously be a part of the process.
I just got two more questions before we conclude. The one is about management, right? So investors are saying, look, okay, whatever happens, we're not getting returns at the moment and we haven't been for a few months. And even if our capital investments are paid out, we're losing money between now and that total payout because we're not getting return on our investment. In the meanwhile, the management continues to get their salary. That's the assumption, and they continue. They don't take any financial pain. And then there are those who are saying that the CEO is playing cricket overseas in an over 50 league when there's major issues happening back home. What's your thoughts as a non-exec director on those issues?
Yeah, Maulana, so first of all, I must emphasize yet again that every board member and director is working a 16-hour day at the moment, and we have been doing this for the past number of months without remuneration. Nobody gets paid a salary. It's never been structured in the board's constitution, and inshallah will never be a thing that comes into the business. So if anybody, inshallah, wants to take over a 16-hour work day with zero pay, they're most welcome to come in and take the responsibilities over. The only money that Vian gets, or the only money that Vian and his management team have gotten, is part of the Mudaraba agreement. When the business is profitable, they make money. When the business is not profitable, they don't make money.
So no salaries?
Exactly. When they do not make money, 100%. So purposes. Maulana, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, is that Al Mabroor have an admin infrastructure that is set up in Stellenbosch, right, at the head office. The financial burden of the admin responsibility in terms of staff members' salaries, everything that we see administratively behind the scenes is not paid by the fund. The fund and the investors don't pay for that. That comes out of whatever money Vian makes, has earned, or does earn from the fund. So the general partner is responsible for that admin, for that admin setup. So that is very important and very imperative to understand that whether he's making money from the fund or not making money from the fund, he's still paying those people's salaries. He's still keeping
from his own pocket.
From his own pocket. He's still keeping the business, the admin segment of the business operational, such that clients can call in, voice their frustration, send through whatever documentation they need to do that. All that is handled by the general partner. It has nothing to do as an expense line item for the investor community at all.
Last question, Yaseen, and I know this is a difficult one, right? But because, you don't have a glass ball in front of you, you don't have knowledge of the unseen. It's difficult to give time frames, it's difficult to give assurances. But is there anything you can say to the investors out there to placate them? Because the one concern they have now is definite they're not getting any dividends in the short term until this process unfolds. It could be months, it could be years. Then they're not sure if the assets are sold, whether they'll get their full 100% return, full 100% capital investment, or 60% or 70%. There's all these uncertainties, right? Is there any assurance that you can give in terms of timelines, in terms of what they're likely to get eventually from the money that they've invested?
Well, Anna, listen, all I can say to the investor community is to offer some degree of placatement is that, remember, we are very empathetic of what's going on at the moment, primarily because we are investors, we have family members, investors, and invested, and we want to see the right thing happen. That's the first thing, inshallah. We are here and we are committed to walking this road until, inshallah, the road is complete, and the road is completed in a manner whereby investors feel that the outcome is, number one, fair and equitable, inshallah. Regarding the amount that an investor may get, whatever it might be,
Mulana, the simplest way I can put that to our investor communities, and I'm saying this with absolute sincerity, if Mulana, myself, you, and our beloved engineer in the radio station had put money together to buy a house, and after a couple of months, you and I say to him, listen, we need our money back, because ultimately at the moment we have some financial distress, the house will have to then be put on the market, right? The sale that is then achieved through that particular sale of the house will be dependent on a variety of different factors at that particular point in time. It may be that at that point in time, factors are good, you get your capital back. You may get your capital back with profit, or you may get less than your capital back. Now, that is effectively what a portion of the investor community are asking for now. They're asking for money, not necessarily at all cost, but as quickly as possible. The only way for the fund to generate money as quickly as possible is to sell assets. And if assets are sold in a quick kind of scenario, there will perhaps maybe be scenarios where you get back less than what you've put in. But if patience is exercised, if the plan is something that's bankable, that really gives investors confidence, and I'm referring to the plan from Zahir and from Sean, if it's something that investors can afford to be a little bit patient with, then inshallah, the intention, and I must say this absolutely 100%, the intention that Vian has always had is that investors must be able to get back 100% of what their dues are. There mustn't be any capital losses. But again, it depends on the sentiment of the market, how quickly the process needs to unfold, and how desperate our investor community is. So if patience is exercised, inshallah, if we have a bit of sabr, inshallah, Allah will make it such that the end result will be greatly rewarding. Inshallah. But if, on the other hand, external pressure is put in and things have to happen at a very quick rate, then unfortunately, selling assets quickly does come at a cost, unfortunately.
Yaseen, I must thank you for being willing to come on and to engage with us. I know it's a difficult time for the board as much as it is a difficult time for the investors. We can make dua, Allah guide you, and hopefully to an outcome that will be beneficial for all. Jazakumullah for your time, and hopefully you'll be willing to chat to us in the future again.
Manana, let's do this periodically, inshallah. I mean, I'm very happy to have these engagements. Jazakallah khair to you and Radio Islam. And our message to the investor communities is, please, let's try and be a bit patient with, inshallah, the processes. And we make lots of dua, especially in these big days, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let the right thing happen, where everybody is protected and the outcome is fair and equitable for everybody, inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That was Non-Executive Director at Mabroor Agri Pty Limited, Yaseen Badat. Well, we covered the questions we thought were important, not everything, and we hope that will give you a bit of insight, if not total.